you for those of you in the United States joining me in the morning, and those of you that are abroad. We're trying to do this. We set aside this time so that you all would hopefully have an opportunity to join these conversations, even if it is only every other one. But hopefully this time will work out. In the future, if there are better times for people, we can certainly explore those. Again, just a couple pieces of information. Number one is, remember, these office hours are recorded. If you're not comfortable with that, please either feel free not to contribute or to log out, whatever you're comfortable with. But we are recording them just for a number of reasons. And we will not be using your contributions without your permission. We will, if there's an excerpt from one of these we want to use for something, I would ask you personally if this was okay to post online or something of that nature. And we could also do it anonymously. All right, about 5 more people kind of confirmed they were coming, but hopefully they'll join us over time. Let me just make sure I have. All right. All right. So this time we had 2 articles, and each time we're going to try to discuss 2 articles. And the first article talks about social emotional health versus social emotional skills. And there's a lot of other stuff in the article too. This is a kind of a big one that I put together, and we actually got a lot of positive feedback from members of the mental health community as well as speech and OT, who really hadn't identified the difference between these 2 terms, even though they are kind of used differently, and in different environments we see them used differently. So I'd like to open the conversation first by talking about, what social emotional health is, and kind of what the concepts are that you took from this, or what really stood out to you. So who wanted to go first? Does anybody want to contribute a thought, a feeling, a question, a
I'll contribute.
disagreement? Yes, please.
Yeah. Good morning. I was just, kind of just thinking about really synthesizing both articles, but mostly talking about the first one, just, thinking about how all individuals are capable of strengthening their social and emotional health.
Right.
And, thinking about using models like Greenspan, Floortime, and how you can have these co-regulated interactions to be able to, help the child understand what they're experiencing, and, how you can work on how that impacts their behavior through improving their social and emotional health.
Absolutely. You hit a couple big terms there. You talked about co-regulated interactions, right? There's an article specifically about that later in our discussions. But for those of you that aren't quite familiar with it, I'll just share kind of my father's definition of it and why it's so important. A co-regulated interaction is not a technique, it's a process. It's a process by which we exchange both nonverbal and verbal information. And with infants, it's all nonverbal, right? It's a look for a look, a smile for a smile, a sound for a sound, right? A movement for a movement. The baby raises their hands like this, and you go, oh, you got it, right? And we're having an exchange. We may produce sounds, they might not. We might use words, they might not. But the key is the back and forth signaling that's occurring within the exchange. It's actually both offering information and receiving information from the brain. Children need this experience. Think about our brain like a computer hardware, okay, the CPU, right? The stuff that goes inside your laptop or that big tower you have sitting on your desk at work, right? That's your brain. Then at some point, a programmer sat in front of a computer and typed in a bunch of code, right? And they kind of gave your computer instructions and an operating system in order to run itself. Well, this is how a child's brain gets coded. Early in life, starting at the first day the child is alive, they are starting to take in and respond to both sensory and emotional stimulus. And this stimulus is what allows us to have reciprocity and respond to it, but not only just impulsively respond to it. I hear a sound, I turn. Eventually, as this process emerges more complexly, we see that the response patterns become more calculated. They become more thoughtful. They become more planned, and they require more steps. And so now we're not just interpreting and taking in, but now we're purposely responding in more complex ways. So you can see the evolution of the communication through these co-regulated interactions. But what Ashley was talking about is how the emotional states that we experience, how we understand the different emotions that we're experiencing through these co-regulated interactions. And one of the principles there that not only did my father talk about, but many psychologists and developmental theorists, they talk about something called affect mirroring, meaning that when a child sees your face as a mirror to what they're experiencing, so they're sad, they're going, oh, I won, it broke, and they're very upset and beside themselves, and you look at them and you empathize, say, oh buddy, I know you didn't want your toy to break. Oh, I can't stand it when my toy breaks. Oh buddy, I'm so sorry. Or let me help you, whatever. We show an understanding of what he's experienced, and guess what happens? Because he sees something reflected in our face, it's not identical, but it's something that is matching his affective state. And it differs with each affective state. So now, let's say the same little boy is angry because he can't have that toy off the top shelf. Now, instead of looking at him and say, oh, buddy, I know you're so sad because your toy broke, say, oh, yeah, I know you're angry. Oh, I know you want that toy. Oh, I want that toy too. Oh, I can't reach it. Or whatever it is. I'm showing, hey, I understand how you feel. That affective mirroring is the beginning of some of these co-regulated interactions and experiences that allow us to understand different emotional states. And it's an important part of kind of the technique set that goes into these co-regulated interactions, affect mirroring. But as we're progressing in this, it's not just a single exchange, it's a many step exchange. The child does something, you do something. The child does something, you do something. And what happens is the child gets a little excited, but then all slows down a little bit. The child gets a little uninterested and they get interested again, right? And we do the same thing. We're constantly oscillating our energy levels, our affective states throughout the exchange. So the child's frustrated because the building he was just making fell down. You're, I'm so frustrated. Then we counter-regulate. We slow him down, we get back to it. But what's happening is by keeping the interaction going, by making sure that we're having an exchange around this feeling of sadness, disappointment, frustration, whatever it is, we're actually showing the child it's okay to feel this way. And we're here to help you. And we're going to guide you through it. And guess what? You don't have to rev up and get out of control because I'm going to be here to help you stay within a nice balance. And now we have regulation. And actually, self-regulation emerges from these co-regulated interactions. And if we don't have a wide range of emotional experiences in our first 3 years of life where we're doing this, and unfortunately, in environments where we're left alone a lot and not having one-on-one exchanges, such as really big, busy, daycare or preschool environments, or if we're just left alone at home, or we're ignored when we're having these experiences because all of a sudden I'm frustrated and our parents are told to ignore us. Well, any one of these lack of feedback situations can delay the development of our understanding of those different emotional states. However, when we have a nurturing caregiver or older sibling or someone who can maintain a co-regulated interaction with us around these affective states, we can now mature. We as adults think about this stuff very linearly, right? We think, okay, a child isn't understanding anger. Let's teach them about anger. Let's help them identify it on a picture chart. Let's tell them what they're supposed to do when they feel angry. Say, I'm angry, I need help, whatever it is. Yeah, those things can work a little bit as skills, but they don't give you the same understanding internally. Just because I can point to a picture and say angry doesn't mean I know what angry feels like. It doesn't mean that I know that even my experiences of anger are the same as that picture on the wall. And even if I can say angry because I'm feeling angry and that person has an angry face, it still is a detachment from what I'm experiencing because I'm no longer expressing what I'm feeling. I'm expressing what he's feeling and relating it to what I'm experiencing. So the meaning does get impacted. So that was a long-winded discussion on the matter, actually, but thank you. And I just want to highlight these co-regulated interactions are the foundation for everything we're trying to achieve with so many children. And it's where our emotional health, our affective state modulation, meaning self-control and self-regulation, comes from. And to one of the point you made, Ashley, about kind of how we're all capable of it. I mean, even into our adulthood, using psychodynamic interventions versus behavioral interventions can yield significant changes in one's well-being. It happens all the time. And so it's important to note that whether it's our child or ourselves, that we're not stuck on just changing our behavior. we can actually improve the way we feel. We can actually improve how we think about things, not by someone telling us what to think, but actually changing our own perception of those experiences. I was working with a young adult at one point, because our practice works with 30-plus-year-olds sometimes, because they have immature developmental stages that need to go back, and we don't treat them as we're still working on them the same way we would with anybody. We follow the lead, challenge, and expand. And so this 30-year-old had been through some trauma in his life, and he felt very, very strongly about that trauma, and from a babysitter when he was younger. And he would sometimes bring it up in sessions, and he was working with one of our occupational therapists on activities of daily living, but also sensory regulation and other things. And as they kept working together, and I'd even chat with him in the office sometimes, we noticed that simply by discussing his trauma with this therapist, getting affective signaling and maintaining co-regulated interactions with the therapist wasn't trying to tell him what to feel. She wasn't a psychologist, nor should a psychologist do that. They shouldn't tell you what to think. But nonetheless, she wasn't trying to tell him what to do. She was trying to help him think about it in new ways, problem solve the current situations that were connecting to his previous trauma. So one of the things that he was struggling with as an adult was building relationships. And he didn't want to build relationships because he didn't trust people, because he thought it was going to get hurt. Well, guess what happened in the sessions? He started building a relationship with this therapist. And they started talking about relationships and what he likes about them, what he doesn't like about them, what he trusts about them, what he doesn't trust. And she would offer sometimes her own, experience as well. But by having these co-regulating exchanges and pushing him and challenging him to expand his thinking about his own experiences by answering who, what, when, or why questions and analyzing things at a deeper reflective level, all of a sudden we noticed that he wasn't talking about relationships so negatively. He was actually changing how he felt about relationships, which in turn changed how he thought about relationships, which in turn changed how he behaved in relationships. So now you can see the process that we're trying to encourage with these kids. First, we're changing how they feel about things, their belief structure. Then that's going to improve how they think about things. And then it's going to change how they operate. But if we start from the operational skills, just teaching a behavior, hello, my name is Jake, or something else, we never get to those full comprehensive results. All right, next question, next thought question about that. Anything? I know I just said a lot, sorry. It's a hot topic. Anybody else want to comment on the social emotional? Because one of the topics in there is the difference between behavioral methodologies and psychodynamic methodologies. And it's important we know the difference in what they are meant to achieve, because behavioral methodologies were never meant to improve social emotional health. They're just meant to teach social skills. Okay. Even cognitive behavioral therapy has never been proven to improve social emotional health. It's just meant to deal with the symptoms of social emotional challenges, right? So if I'm feeling anxious, I can use CBT to address the symptoms of anxiety, sometimes effectively, sometimes not effectively. But it's not going to actually improve my anxiety, right? I still am anxious. I'm just dealing with the symptoms. Some people do report some mild improvements, but those are all adults. Never for a child have they found that actual CBT has been effective at truly treating the anxiety. It just manages the symptoms of the anxiety. So, any other comments or thoughts? Well, guys, these are office hours. I want to have a conversation, or at least someone bring up a topic they want to talk about.
I think there's a great comment in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see the chat. Sorry, I apologize. Dysregulation doesn't have to look like a tantrum, correct? Can not engaging enough be considered dysregulation? Absolutely. So it depends on why they're not engaging, right? But self-involvement is a type of dysregulation, I think is what you're kind of indicating. So if we are self-involved because we're overstimulated, many children, they'll find, a small toy, some things that are plastic and hard, and they'll start looking at the designs on it, moving the parts, opening it up, and they'll tune out the rest of the world. Oftentimes, not always, but that can many times be the case where a child is actually trying to tune out the world because the world is too stimulating for them. And then as they focus in on these small objects, they're able to filter out all the overstimulation, and it becomes much more, they're more regulated, but they're being regulated in a maladaptive, antisocial manner, right? And so when we think about what's adaptive, social skills and being engaged is adaptive. Being isolated and self-involved and antisocial is maladaptive in the long run. So if a child is self-involving or disengaging in an interest like this, it can be either overstimulation or it can be understimulation, right? They haven't had enough of this, of the input they need, where they need more physical movement, pressure, touch, or they need more affect, where they need more enthusiasm and kind of that outward expression of love and compassion from their caregivers. So, but yes, it absolutely can be considered dysregulation. Also, unfortunately, it's the one that most people miss, especially in schools, because a child playing on their own is always a good thing for teachers. And they see independent play as a necessary skill for kids. But the reality is independent play is only, and let me repeat this, some of you have heard me say this before, it's only an important skill if they've mastered engaging play first, right? If they can fully engage with you, then we want to teach them to be independent. But there's a reason why we don't teach a 3 or 4 month old to do independent play regularly before we help them develop the ability to engage and interact with us. We need to establish these things in order for them to operate correctly. Success of CBT depends on whether the therapist was successful in changing a belief that created a problem. In some cases, counter beliefs may seem convincing, leading to positive. Correct. But what they've never found is that they can do that in children. And so they found that with adults who are voluntarily participating in the CBT, where they think the belief is going to come after the practice of the new behavior. Whereas with children, and what they're finding with behavioral change, especially at younger ages, the belief has to predate. It has to come first. So you have to shift the belief first, right? And then you can practice the new behavior. And I'm all about looking at the belief in the practice of the new behavior, but the belief has to come first. And for children, that rarely happens in CBT. Any other comments or thoughts? Any other concepts in this big article that kind of stood out where, we're working on that social emotional health? Because one of the things that came up in my office when I presented this is that people rejected the idea that social emotional health is the absence of the need for compensatory mechanisms and other kind of behavioral supports. And one of the things that we discussed was, and actually we had 2 mental health professionals at the time, and I asked them what social emotional health was to them, and they kind of all said the same thing, that that if they can actually learn to control what they're feeling by developing new behaviors, by going for a run or having coffee or taking 10 deep breaths, that's social emotional health, right? These compensatory mechanisms. And unfortunately, there's a reason why some adults get frustrated and need to take 10 deep breaths, and some adults get frustrated and don't need to take 10 deep breaths. They have very different systems, and one system is healthier than another system if that's the case, period. Now, I'm not saying the person who's take 10 deep breaths has a diagnostic issue, right, or some clinical disorder. But what I am saying is they are having a stronger reaction to that frustration, leading them to meet and use some other mechanism to regulate themselves instead of actually being able to tolerate their own affective states. And that is the difference between social emotional health and working towards social emotional health, right? I'm not saying this person is unhealthy. I'm just saying they're not as healthy as a person who doesn't need to use those supports. And that also is.
I want to make a comment.
Yeah, please.
I was just going to make a comment, like thinking about children that are in, a classroom that's using maybe some like ABA type techniques where they have the schedule and, this sticker chart and all these things, but really thinking about the why behind the child has the emotion and being able to work on that. So when we're just kind of making them be compliant and, teaching them that they have to follow these certain instructions and rules, then you're not really getting to the root of really what their feelings are. And there's no space for them to have that type of interaction to work through what they're feeling. I mean, it's the same as adults of what you're saying. You can be mad at somebody in traffic and then you can take 10 deep breaths and you're going to be better because you have this great strategy. But tomorrow when someone cuts you off, you're probably going to get upset again.
Right. Exactly. No, that's exactly it. And one of the comments earlier about kind of shifting beliefs with the CBT structure of taking 10 deep breaths, or, we've had adolescent boys who are supposed to snap a rubber band on their wrist. And I'm not saying these are the only CBT recommendations, but they've actually been more regular than I would like to see. Is that, over time, yeah, maybe we do shift our belief that, hey, it's not the end of the world that someone cut me off, or it's not the end of the world that I'm going to be late. But the reality is it takes a very long time of practicing something to shift our beliefs. And we have to want to shift our beliefs. We have to be actively participating to cause that neurological shift, right? We can't just be there because someone's telling us to be there, or we're there because we're kind of exploring something, or we're there because we're getting rewarded, as we are with many children, but we're there because we believe that we need to make this change. Think about it like, getting a gym membership after the holidays, right? I use this analogy a lot. A lot of adults, that's their New Year's resolution. Now, years ago, I was kind of inconsistent with my health and workouts, but then I was actually diagnosed with a health issue that would require me staying more in shape to combat it. And I have, and the blood tests are all normal, which is great. It was inflammatory disease. Now, I'm chronically going to the gym. I go 5-6 days a week, right? And people ask me why. Well, I've developed these behaviors and these habits around going to the gym that actually do regulate me, and I enjoy it. But the reason I developed it is because I developed a new belief that if I do not, bad things will happen. And if I do, I can make myself feel better and heal myself. And that was actually true. And I proved it to myself by practicing. But before I had that belief, before I had a real reason to be actively pursuing this, I actually was believing that the gym was good for me, sure, but I was never consistent with it. And as a result, I wasn't getting the same benefits from it, and I wasn't really developing new habits, and I wasn't actually improving my own kind of mental states around that. Another question: is there developmental capacity to achieve first before a child is introduced to more or less friendly group of kid as an everyday experience, like preschool? Do they need priming? Okay, great question. This gets more into kind of social skills and kind of how we develop our social ability with peers. One of the things my father said that we've seen clinically at the Floortime Center for the last 20 years is that in order for a child to be successful with peers, they have to first be successful with adults. Meaning adults adapt to the child. Adults get on the child's level. They join them on the floor. Peers may be on the floor already, but they're not going to join the child necessarily and follow their lead. They're going to challenge them. They're going to be having their own ideas. They might disagree. They're not going to raise their affect. They're not going to slow down their affect, right? They're going to be less forgiving. So you essentially have to have a pretty solid skill set of human interaction with adults who are adaptive to you and nurturing with you first, and maintaining that continuous flow at the fourth milestone. That's the key, the fourth milestone with an adult consistently. Then what happens is, now, if I can interact with you consistently and I'm at that continuous flow, what that implies is that I have a deeper understanding of social patterns, meaning that when you do something, I'm already thinking about what I'm going to do. And then when I do something, I'm watching what you're going to do and interpreting it so I can then figure out what I'm going to do, right? That's what a real social interaction and pattern requires. So when you think about a child who's mastering or developing those skills, they first do it with caregivers through what Ashley said earlier, co-regulated interactions, and they sustain them. And if we can get them all the time, then we can actually have this child move into a peer environment and be more successful. But I use the analogy of swimming, right? If you want a child to learn how to swim and they don't know how to swim, right? They've only had a few opportunities to be near water, in water, and they didn't really take to swimming very well, just like a child who's not really taking to interacting with you as an adult very well, right? They're not developing these skills. Well, is the next step to put them in a pool with their friends? and let them figure out how to swim by watching their friends? No, it's not. One, is dangerous, but number two is, how are you going to understand what you're watching if you don't understand what you're watching, if you don't have the skill set already, right? You cannot understand and learn from experience if you don't have the basics to understand what you're looking at. So you can't learn what you don't know already in some respect. And if we are going to learn these skills, we have to be nurtured at first. So how do most kids learn to swim? They have a caregiver who holds them, who supports them, who entices them, who encourages them, who gets in the water with them, right? They get on their level. They show them, I'm going to adapt to you. They make them feel safe. So, Safia, they help them develop a belief about the water, that the water is a safe, fun place. Now I start splashing and moving my arms. Now I might even move a little bit when I'm floating to get to my mommy or daddy. Now, if I'm with my friends, I have a framework to understand what I'm looking at. So then the same is true now. We replace swimming with social skills. And this is why so many children enter school, and unfortunately things get worse because they're not ready yet developmentally, because it's around 18 months of life that fourth milestone really kicks in. We have longer patterns. So it's tricky. And I know most kids with these developmental challenges, they don't have some of these prerequisite skills as you would think. It would be like trying to teach a child math who can't count, right? Or do addition, subtraction, but we're trying to teach them algebra, right? There's a precursor to everything. And precursors to playing with peers is making sure we can interact and communicate with adults first.